She smiled while I cried. That's how it started. The moment I realized kindness in my house was a performance, and I was the audience who never got to clap. Diane, my stepmother, looked right at me, tears running down my face, and said with that calm, poisoned sweetness, "You'll never be one of us, Lena." I can still feel the sting of those words. They didn't shout. They whispered, and somehow that hurt more. Because in my family, silence was louder than screaming. My father just looked away, pretending not to hear. My stepsister Rachel hid her smirk behind a glass of lemonade. Everyone knew I was the outsider, except me. People say families protect you. Mine watched me break and smiled. That day, something inside me went quiet. I stopped begging to be loved and started listening instead. Listening to whispers behind doors, to secrets hidden in drawers, to the truth that my tears couldn't wash away. Because one day, that same truth would burn through every fake smile in that house. And when it did, even Diane's perfect mask couldn't survive it. People often say that after loss, time heals everything. But time didn't heal my home. It only repainted it. After my mother died, my father remarried a woman named Diane. She had a soft voice, graceful manners, and the kind of beauty that made people stop and smile. At first, I thought I was lucky. She called me sweetheart and baked pies with my name written in frosting. For a while, I believed her warmth was real. Our house looked like a picture-perfect family, dinners around the big oak table, laughter echoing down the hall. Diane loved hosting. She'd light candles, play soft music, and serve dishes that looked too pretty to eat. Neighbors would say, "Thomas, you've got such a lovely family." And he'd nod proudly, his arm around her, never noticing the way her hand froze whenever I tried to sit beside them. My stepsister Rachel was everything Diane wanted me to be: elegant, confident, loud enough to be noticed. When guests came, Diane would beam at her. "Rachel plays piano beautifully, don't you think?" she'd say, clapping lightly. Then her eyes would drift to me. "And Lena, well, she helps in the kitchen." I used to tell myself that love needed patience, that one day she'd see me as her own. So I tried. I learned Diane's favorite recipes, helped with the garden, even called her mom once. She froze, her smile turning sharp as glass. "Just Diane is fine, dear," she said softly, and turned away. From that day, I noticed the small things. The way my father's tone softened for Rachel, but stayed clipped for me. How Diane's compliments skipped over me like I was invisible. Even Grandma Ruth, my father's mother, started looking at me differently, worry flickering in her eyes. One night, she held my hand and whispered, "Keep your heart steady, child. Not every smile in this house means love." But I still tried. Because that's what good daughters do, right? They stay grateful. They don't question kindness. Then came the family photo. It was Diane's idea. All of us dressed in white, standing in the garden. Rachel in the center, Diane and father on each side. When I tried to step in, Diane gently moved me toward the edge. "Just a bit more to the side, dear," she said, smiling for the camera. The flash went off, and I realized I'd been pushed out of the frame. Later, when the framed photo was hung in the living room, I wasn't in it. My face had been cropped out completely. No one noticed. Or maybe they did, and that was worse. That night, I sat in my room staring at that missing photo, something inside me beginning to ache in a way that words couldn't touch. Because if a family can erase you from a picture, what else can they erase? And somewhere deep down, I began to wonder what else Diane was capable of hiding. It began with whispers I wasn't supposed to hear. Conversations that stopped when I entered a room. Glances traded across dinner tables that said more than words ever could. Diane had a way of making cruelty sound like concern. One morning, as we sat at breakfast, she smiled and said, "Thomas, maybe it's time to think about the future. Rachel's college, her security. You can't spread yourself too thin." My father nodded, distracted by his newspaper, while I sat silently beside my half-eaten toast. I knew what she meant. I was the thin she didn't want him to spread. That same evening, I overheard them talking in the study. She's almost done with school, Diane said softly. Maybe she should learn to stand on her own. You've done enough. My father sighed. You're right. I suppose she'll be fine. I remember standing in the hallway, my hands trembling, realizing how easily love could be erased with one calm conversation. The change happened fast. Suddenly, Rachel's every need was urgent, while mine was a burden. She got a new car for her birthday. I got a polite smile and a lecture about independence. When my father called for family photos, Diane placed her hand on Rachel's shoulder and said, "Our pride and joy." She didn't even look at me. One afternoon, I found Diane in the living room, holding a stack of papers, legal ones. She didn't notice me at first. The words property transfer and will revision were printed on top. When she finally looked up, she said calmly, "Curiosity isn't a good habit, dear." My throat went dry. "What are those?" She smiled. "Just something responsible families handle together." That night, I asked my father directly, "Dad, are you changing your will?" He hesitated. Diane's voice floated in from the kitchen. "We're just organizing things, Lena. Don't be so dramatic." But I saw it in his eyes, confusion, guilt, maybe even shame. The next few weeks were torture. I felt the air shift whenever I entered a room. Rachel started calling me the guest. "Mom says it's better if you focus on finding a job soon," she teased one morning. "You know, since this isn't really your future home." Each word was a knife wrapped in laughter. And my father just stood there, silent. The final blow came at a family dinner. Diane announced she'd be hosting a celebration, a toast to new beginnings. When she raised her glass, she smiled at me. "To family," she said, "and to knowing where we truly belong." Everyone clapped. I didn't. After dinner, I went to clear the plates. My father handed me one of the documents Diane had been hiding. His voice shook as he said, "Lena, I've decided to leave the house to Rachel and Diane. You'll have your mother's keepsakes, of course." I froze, staring at the man who once promised me I'd never be alone. "So that's it?" I whispered. "My whole life, reduced to a box of memories?" He didn't answer. Diane's hand rested gently on his arm, possessive, triumphant. I walked out before they could see my tears. That night, in the quiet of my room, I realized something. I had spent years trying to earn a place in that house. But I was never meant to belong. And as the moonlight hit my mother's photo on the nightstand, I swore to her I wouldn't stay silent anymore. Because if they thought they could erase me from the family, they were about to learn what happens when the forgotten daughter remembers everything. There's a special kind of pain in being invisible inside your own home. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It sits beside you at dinner, walks behind you in silence, and smiles while it takes everything that was once yours. After the inheritance talk, things began to change quickly. Not quietly this time, openly. Diane no longer pretended to be kind. She had won, and she wanted me to feel it. The first cut came during Rachel's birthday party. Our house was glowing with guests, laughter, and music. Diane moved through the crowd like a queen, her hand proudly looped through my father's arm. I stayed in the kitchen, refilling trays, keeping out of sight. That was my unspoken role now, the helper. But then I heard Diane call out, "Everyone, let's take a family photo." I froze, wiping my hands nervously. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, she'd call me too. But as the flash went off, I saw them through the glass doors. My father, Diane, and Rachel, smiling together. My chair was empty. When Rachel noticed me watching, she leaned toward her friends and laughed. "She's always hiding," she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe she likes being the mystery guest." The girls giggled. I forced a smile, but something inside me began to fracture. A few weeks later, Diane started inviting people over from the community, influential ones. My father was trying to impress a potential business partner, and I was told to stay out of sight. But during one dinner, I mistakenly brought in the wrong dish, salmon instead of beef. The partner laughed, trying to be polite, but Diane's smile was sharp. "Oh dear," she said sweetly. "Lena's not used to finer things. She grew up with simpler meals, didn't you?" The table went quiet. My cheeks burned as everyone looked at me like I didn't belong. My father said nothing. Not one word. After that, even the house itself felt like it turned against me. Rachel took my mother's jewelry box from my room, claiming Diane said it looked better in her collection. My father brushed it off when I told him, "Let it go, Lena. It's just things. Just things. My mother's things. My memories." But the worst moment came one Sunday afternoon. Grandma Ruth came over, frail and quiet, her sharp eyes watching everything. Diane put on her sweetest act, serving tea and pastries, pretending to care. When I brought Ruth her cup, she looked at me and whispered, "You look tired, child. They're bleeding your light dry." Tears burned in my eyes. I wanted to tell her everything. But before I could speak, Diane interrupted. "Oh, Mother Ruth, don't listen to Lena's dramatics. She's always been a little fragile." The word hung in the air, fragile. It sounded like an insult dressed in concern. Grandma Ruth frowned, her hands trembling as she said quietly, "I know what I see, Diane." That night, as I helped Ruth back to her car, she squeezed my hand and whispered, "Under the oak chest in the attic, your mother left something for you." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" I asked. But Ruth only smiled weakly. "The truth doesn't stay buried forever, Lena. Even liars forget to lock some doors." I watched her drive away, her words echoing in my mind. Later that night, while the house slept, I crept up to the attic. Dust floated through the air like ghosts. I found the old oak chest Ruth had mentioned, heavy, locked, and older than I was. My hands shook as I touched it, and then I saw it, a small envelope wedged beneath the lid. My mother's handwriting. My name. For a second, I couldn't breathe. The air felt colder, heavier, as if the house itself knew I was about to uncover something I wasn't supposed to see. Because from that moment on, the pain I carried would no longer stay quiet. The day it all fell apart didn't start like a storm. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of morning that pretends everything is fine before tearing your world apart. The house was decorated for Rachel's engagement ceremony, a grand event Diane had been planning for months. Flowers everywhere, photographers buzzing around, music rehearsals echoing through the halls. Diane wanted everything perfect. She even told the caterers, "Make sure the staff stays invisible." I didn't realize she meant me. That morning, I wore a soft blue dress, my mother's favorite color. Grandma Ruth had given it to me years ago, whispering, "Never let them dull your grace." I wanted to believe that if I looked presentable, Diane wouldn't have a reason to mock me in front of guests. But when she saw me, her lips curved into that familiar cold smile. "Oh, Lena, that dress? It's sweet, but maybe too plain for such a special event. Why don't you help the servers instead? You're better behind the scenes." Rachel giggled. "Yes, Mom. She blends in better there." The laughter felt like glass shattering inside my chest. Still, I smiled. I had learned how to survive humiliation quietly. But this time, something about the way my father looked away that broke something in me. He didn't even blink. Didn't even try to stop them. Hours later, as guests arrived, I slipped out to the backyard, the one place still untouched by Diane's perfect control. The wind was warm, and for a moment, I almost forgot the ache. Until I heard my name. "So awkward, isn't it?" One of Rachel's friends whispered near the open window. "Having her around like that. Diane says she's not really family." Another voice laughed. "Then why keep her here?" And then came Diane's tone, sweet poison. "Because Thomas is sentimental. Once he's gone, things will finally be in order." My hands went numb. Once he's gone. I pressed closer to the wall, heart pounding, listening to her weave lies about me, saying I'd been difficult, ungrateful, even unstable. The perfect story to erase me. Later that night, Diane gathered everyone in the living room for a special announcement. Her voice carried like honey over the murmurs of guests. My father stood beside her, looking pale, uncertain. "Before we celebrate Rachel's engagement," Diane said, "there's one more matter, something Thomas and I feel is important for our family's future." My stomach twisted. I already knew. My father cleared his throat. I've made changes to my estate. Everything will go to Diane and Rachel, as they've helped me manage and maintain our home. Lena will receive what was left by her mother. A hush fell over the room. Every eye turned to me. Every heartbeat echoed in my ears. What? I whispered. You mean nothing? Diane stepped forward. Now, dear, don't make a scene. It's not personal, it's practical. Not personal? My voice cracked. You've erased my mother's name, my place, my future, and you call it practical? Rachel's fiancé shifted uncomfortably. Guests whispered. My father's eyes darted to the floor. He couldn't even look at me. That's when I saw it, not sadness in him, but relief. Relief that the confrontation was over, that I would finally stop trying. I felt something inside me snap. Years of silence, obedience, patience, gone in a single heartbeat. I turned to Diane, my voice trembling but sharp. You've taken everything, haven't you? Even my father's spine. Gasps filled the room. Diane's smile never faltered. You always did have your mother's temper, she said softly. Maybe that's why she couldn't keep this family together. That line, that single, cruel lie, ripped through me. I could have screamed. I could have thrown something. But instead, I stood still, letting the silence do the screaming for me. My tears came quietly, hot and angry, as I walked out of that room. No one followed. Not even him. Outside, the cold air hit my face like truth. For the first time, I realized what true loneliness felt like. Not being alone, but being surrounded by people who wanted you to disappear. That night, I packed my things. As I looked around my room, the one I'd painted with my mother years ago, I felt the weight of every memory pressing down on me. But when I saw the letter I'd found in the attic, something inside shifted. My mother's handwriting, her words about truth and courage, suddenly felt like a voice from beyond the grave, pushing me forward. I unfolded it, reading the last line again. If they ever try to take what's yours, don't fight their way. Fight the truth's way. And in that moment, the tears stopped. Because I knew what I had to do. They thought they'd buried me with shame, but they didn't know what I'd uncovered. They didn't know the power of the truth waiting in my hands. I looked at the moon through the window, its light cutting through the darkness, like a promise. They'll hear my silence, I whispered. And when I speak again, it will destroy them. After that night, I stopped flinching at my own reflection. The woman in the mirror had been hollowed out by years of being small, but she wasn't empty. Not anymore. I folded my grief into a shape I could use. I collected every broken piece and began to build something sharp, a plan. I started with what my mother had left me. Not jewelry or money, but words. Her letter had been blunt. Find the truth. It will set you free. I read it again and again, and each time her handwriting steadied me. If the house had been rearranged to hide me, then I'd rearrange the truth until it was impossible to ignore. First, I made alliances. Uncle Frank had always been an observer, quiet and careful. I knocked on his office door, with the attic envelope in my hand. He studied the papers, then met my eyes. These signatures don't match, he said quietly. Diane's been busy. He didn't promise a miracle, but he offered me something more dangerous, the knowledge to dig deeper. We don't march into battle without proof, he warned. Bring me the proof. Mrs. Ellis, the neighbor who kept other people's stories like loose change, gave me more than gossip. She handed me a box of old letters and a faded photograph that tied Diane to transactions and people I'd never suspected. She always liked to keep the receipts, Mrs. Ellis said with a sad look. People like her forget what they throw away. Evan stayed close, steady as ever. He listened when I spoke of plans, never laughing at the anger or the fear, only nodding. We'll do this right, he told me. No traps, no lies. Only what's true. He helped me digitize the letters, organize the dates, and map out the pattern of forged signatures, staged accounts, and transfers that didn't add up. We worked late into the night, the kitchen light carving two shadows on the wall, while outside the world slept and inside the house pretended nothing had changed. I learned the rules. Uncle Frank taught me how wills could be contested, what timeline mattered, and how banks recorded transfers. It was tedious and painful, parsing jargon and deadlines, but each fact was a weapon. Each endorsement, each contradictory date made Diane's perfect story wobble. Still, I needed more than paper. I needed a moment where no one could walk away and pretend they'd seen nothing. My plan had to be public, undeniable, humiliating in the precise way Diane had humiliated me, in front of the faces that mattered. Our neighbors, the family, my father. I imagined a room hushed, cameras rolling, faces pale with surprise. I imagined Diane's smile cracking like a plate. But there was doubt, and I didn't pretend otherwise. Sometimes, late at night, fear crept back in. What if Uncle Frank backed out? What if the signatures weren't enough? What if my father refused to look? The uncertainty tightened in my chest like a fist. Yet every time I felt myself retreat, I read my mother's last line again. Fight the truth's way. Not rage. Not revenge for revenge's sake. Truth. So we stitched the story together. Dates, letters, bank statements, witnesses, and I rehearsed what I would say until the words no longer trembled. Evan offered to record a timeline. Uncle Frank drafted a letter to hold as legal backstop, and Mrs. Ellis agreed to testify if needed. I kept one secret move for myself. The attic envelope, and an old receipt tucked inside it that would make Diane's whole story impossible to deny. On the night before I planned to act, I sat on my mother's dress and whispered into the quiet house, "Tomorrow I end this." I folded the evidence into a folder, felt its weight, heavy and honest, and slipped it into my bag. At dawn, before anyone woke, I stood at the edge of the garden where the family often posed for their perfect photographs. The air smelled like wet grass and jasmine, the same garden that had once excluded me from a frame. I smoothed my dress, my hands steady now, and looked at the front door where promises and lies had passed through. I walked toward it, toward the room where Diane would smugly call the family to attention. My heart beat loud, a drumbeat counting down. I reached the door, the folder pressing into my palm. I thought of my mother's handwriting, of Ruth's tired eyes, of every shove that had pushed me to the edge. I put my hand on the doorknob, and for one small, trembling second, I wondered if I could really go through with it. Then I turned the knob. The day of Rachel's engagement party arrived like a scene straight out of Diane's dream. Strings of golden lights across the garden, soft music drifting through the air, guests dressed like magazine pages. Every detail screamed perfection. But underneath it, something darker pulsed, my truth, waiting to explode. Diane moved through the crowd in her shimmering silver gown, smiling that practiced smile. My father followed her, looking proud, tired, and oblivious. Rachel was glowing, soaking in every compliment. I watched them from a distance, a quiet shadow among the glitter. But this time, I wasn't just watching, I was waiting. Uncle Frank had arrived earlier, carrying the sealed envelope with every forged signature and missing document inside. Evan stood near the sound system, ready to cue the video we'd prepared. Mrs. Ellis sat quietly in the corner, clutching the letter she'd sworn to read if I couldn't find the courage. The stage was set. Diane's perfect world was about to unravel. Diane clinked her glass. "Everyone," she called out. "Before we toast to Rachel and her wonderful fiancé, I want to say a few words about family, about loyalty and love, and the bonds that make a home." Her voice was honeyed. I felt my blood turn cold. That's when I stepped forward. "Maybe," I said softly, "we should start with honesty." The murmurs began instantly. Diane blinked, the smile on her lips flickering. "Lena, dear, not now. This isn't. It's exactly the right time." I turned toward the crowd. "Because tonight, everyone deserves to know what kind of family this really is." Gasps rippled through the guests. My father frowned. "Lena, please don't ruin this evening." "I'm not ruining it, Dad," I said, voice steady. "I'm saving what's left of your name." Evan pressed the button. The screen flickered to life behind us. Photos, letters, scanned signatures. Diane's face appeared beside a document stamped forged. Then came the audio, her voice from a recording I'd taken weeks earlier. "Once he's gone, things will finally be in order." The crowd went silent. Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. My father's glass shattered on the floor. Diane turned pale, her mask slipping for the first time. "This is absurd," she snapped. "You can't believe." Uncle Frank's voice cut through hers, calm and precise. "Every document has been verified. These are your signatures, Diane. And Thomas, your late wife's assets were redirected to accounts controlled by your current spouse." My father staggered back, the truth sinking into his face like a shadow. "Diane, tell me this isn't true." But she couldn't. Her mouth opened, then closed. The crowd's murmurs swelled, whispers of forgery, inheritance, deceit. I stepped closer, my voice trembling but sharp. "You told me I'd never be one of you, that I didn't belong. But this house, this family was built on lies. And tonight, I'm tearing them down." Diane lunged toward me, desperation twisting her face. "You ungrateful child. You think you've won." I didn't move. "No," I said quietly. "I didn't win. The truth did." For a long moment, no one spoke. The air was heavy, electric. Diane's image froze on the screen, her smile from years ago, bright and false, then faded into black. My father sank into a chair, whispering, "What have I done?" His voice broke. "Lena, I looked at him, but there was nothing left to say. The apology came too late, after too many silences. The guests began to leave one by one, avoiding Diane's glare, whispering behind gloved hands. Rachel fled to her room in tears. And Diane, once the center of every conversation, now stood alone, surrounded by the pieces of her own lies. I walked past her slowly. For a second, our eyes met. She looked small, stripped of power. I whispered, "You were right about one thing. I'll never be one of you." Then I turned toward the door. Behind me, the music had stopped, the lights dimmed. The air felt clean for the first time in years. My mother's letter rested in my hand, its paper soft and trembling, like a heartbeat that had finally been set free. Justice didn't roar that night, it whispered. And in that whisper, Diane's empire of pretense crumbled. Because sometimes, the loudest revenge isn't fury, it's truth spoken where lies once ruled. The house was silent the next morning. Not the soft silence of peace, but the kind that comes after an explosion, when the dust is still settling and everyone is afraid to breathe. I walked through the halls that had once felt like a battlefield. The portraits on the wall, all those smiling faces, all those lies, looked different now. Hollow. Even the air felt different, lighter, though heavy with truth. Diane's silver heels were gone from the entryway. The car had disappeared before dawn. Rachel hadn't come out of her room since the party. Her laughter, the one that used to echo like a song of triumph, was now just a memory. And my father, he sat alone in his study, staring at the papers Uncle Frank had left behind. When I stepped inside, he didn't look up. His hands trembled over the documents that proved everything. For the first time, I saw him not as a father, but as a man, weak, tired, and finally aware of what he'd lost. "Lena," he said, his voice rough, "I don't deserve forgiveness." I didn't answer immediately. The ache in me had quieted, replaced by something clearer, not victory, but release. I looked at him and softly said, "You don't need to ask for forgiveness. You need to learn what silence costs." He closed his eyes, and for a moment, I almost pitied him. But pity wasn't peace. Peace was walking away. I left the study and went to the garden, the same one where they'd once taken that family photo without me. The flowers were still in bloom, defiant against the broken house behind me. I stood there for a long time, letting the morning wind wash over me. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. Evan arrived a little later, quiet as always. He didn't ask how it went. He'd seen enough to know. We stood side by side as the sun rose higher, spilling light over everything Diane had tried to own. "You did it," he finally said. I smiled faintly. "No," I said, my voice calm, steady. "The truth did." That line had hung between us, soft but final. Because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming something deeper, the self-respect that humiliation had stolen, the voice I'd buried for years just to keep the peace. Uncle Frank later confirmed that Diane and Rachel had left town for good. The accounts were frozen, the documents under investigation. Justice would take its course, but for me, it already had. My justice had been seeing her face when her lies collapsed under their own weight. That evening, I packed what little I wanted to take: my mother's letter, her blue dress, and one photo of Grandma Ruth. Everything else could stay in that house of ghosts. As I locked the door behind me, I whispered, "It's not my home anymore, and maybe it never was." I walked down the long driveway, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, the wind brushing against my face. For once, I wasn't running away. I was walking toward something: freedom, perhaps, or just the quiet that comes when your heart finally stops defending itself. Before I turned the corner, I looked back one last time. The sunlight hit the windows, blinding and beautiful, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw my mother's reflection in the glass, smiling, proud, free. In that moment, I understood. Dignity isn't given by others. It's something you protect, even when the world tries to strip it away. And sometimes, the most powerful revenge isn't destruction, it's walking away with your head high, knowing the truth stands taller than any lie ever could.